Hi, welcome to Old Path Ministries and our study through the book of Joshua. We make it to chapter 16 today as we get to the allotment of the bits of land that are going to be given to the tribes. And it really kind of dominates the next several chapters. So we won't look at every single verse of this because really what it does is it kind of sets the boundaries of each one of the tribal allotments using a lot of name places that we may or may not even genuinely know. But of the ones that we do, we're able to develop maps. I've put some of them up for you. I'll do again today. Putting one up at the very beginning probably would be good, and you can screen capture that. But you can go online and find really good detailed maps of where each of the tribes would have located. And we'll go through that. There are the cities of refuge that are going to be mentioned here. There is also the mention of the cities that were given to the Levites and where they would have been. That's all kind of what's being dealt with in this particular part of these chapters. Now, I guess the big picture to this, it's kind of the implied thing here. I think it's important to note once again, as I have in previous weeks, when we stop to think about what Joshua is being asked to do here and what he's overseeing, this is now the realization of the children of Israel coming back into the land. And that's, believe it or not, I think about it, quite often, and I'm sure many of you have as well. What we're seeing here, because of the description, is something that God had put in place, thousands of years ago, of them coming into the land and occupying it. So the idea that God had chosen this land, had chosen to give it to them, and this is better than 500 years after the initial promise to Abraham, they're finally coming into the land. And so it was given by God to the people. When you go there to visit, you're going to be looking at all kinds of archaeological ruins that prove that Jews were there in that land for thousands of years. So the idea that it's a contested territory nowadays is really not a contested issue. Who has the roots there, and who has the proof that they've been there for all that time? But to the person who believes in what the Bible has to say about it, it's even more important because of who gave the land in the first place. So if we recognize that it's God's land and he gave it to who he gave it to, the idea that we're going to pick and choose and squabble and fight over it today in the political or the geopolitical sense now is just man trying to insert himself into something that God has settled once and for all. Now, with all that being said, the few things that really are helpful for us is to recognize that even in the giving of the land, it wasn't something that they just went and picked and chose what it was that they wanted. They may very well have sought out particular lands, but they would have still had to come and make sure that God was good with it. We're going to notice that some of the tribes hadn't really even gone out and started to figure out where they might want to be and then inquire of the Lord if that was the place where they were to go. And that shows that to some extent that the tribes that have already gone out and laid hold of their land, there must have been an intention. They wanted to go and do this because they're already spoken for. At this point, Joshua is going to have to say to a number of the tribes, why are you guys still here? They're at Gilgal, and why are you still here? Why don't you go take the land? We still need to go do this. And so we get to that part today. We get to some things, again, that are kind of implications, and these things that are implied make us ask some questions. Why did that have to be that way? And we'll get to those as well. But we get to the cities of refuge in this, and where those are, and then the allotment for the tribe of Levi, and where would the Levites be, and we're given those names of those cities. And so what I'm going to do as we go through this, I want to highlight the things in the chapters that I believe are of importance. When it comes to just saying it was by this river or by that mountain or by this city, we're going to kind of skip over those things because, again, many of them are not known to us where we can absolutely put a pin in a map and say this is it. But what we do have with what we can put together is the big, large areas which we have. And really, when you look at the maps of people who have put those together, of the allotments to the tribes, it's pretty well consensus where each of them went. So we'll get into that as we look at the chapters. We're going to start at chapter 16. So having turned there, let's have a word of prayer and we'll take a look at the text. Father, as we come before you and we recognize the importance of the things recorded here and why it was put together with such great detail, we ask, Lord, that we would understand why that is important, and then also in the taking of the land, why obedience to you should have been the thing that was above everything, as it is to this day. The obedience to you and doing what you have instructed is so very, very important and vital to us. I would ask, Lord, that you would help us to see the importance of those truths. And we ask, God, that you would be glorified through the teaching of your word, and that you would open our eyes to the areas that are helpful and important for us to know as New Testament believers. So we give you thanks and praise, and we ask that you would be glorified in all of what we do, and we ask it in Jesus' name. Okay, one last thing before we look at this, just as kind of a way of repeating a little bit. The children of Israel are finally coming into the land, and so they are going to be taking hold of, and finally, if you will, settling in the land that was given to them. I avoid using the word occupy because that gives the impression, and it's what's used in our world today. When you say occupy, it means you shouldn't be there. You're just taking it by force, and you're exerting your will over other people who have it by right. That's not the case, because by right, God has given them this land, and since it is He who is able to grant deed to these things, He's the only one who could rescind this and say, it's no longer your land, I'm taking it back, and God's never done that. Now, God has allowed the children of Israel through the world's history, times when they have been displaced from the land, but He has repeatedly promised that He would regather them. So, again, it's God's land to control. He's given it by promise to Abraham, 4,000 years ago, and he never changed his mind on that. Now it's 500 years later, they're finally coming into the land. God is doing two things in fulfilling the promise to Abraham and to his descendants. Now they're coming into the land. Abraham lived in the land. Isaac, Jacob, they all lived in the land of Israel, but never put down permanent roots, and their descendants never spread throughout the land. Now that's taking place. Hundreds of years later, but it's taking place, and God wants to use His children, the children of Israel, as they come into the land to not only settle it, making good on the promise to Abraham, but to cleanse the land of the wickedness of the pagan nations that were there, so that they didn't infest the children of Israel. We're going to see that that's still a problem at the time here with Joshua, even as they come into the land. And it begs some interesting questions. So, chapter 16 says, so the lot to the children of Joseph from the Jordan by Jericho to the waters of Jericho on the east, to the wilderness that goes up from Jericho through the mountains to Bethel. And so Bethel is just a little bit to what we would consider as kind of the east of Jerusalem. And so what you're talking about, Jericho, is again to the east of Jerusalem. And so this gives you an idea of when it says Joseph, we're talking about Manasseh and Ephraim. So I'm putting up a map. And what you get from this map, again, you can go online or you can screenshot what I'm putting up here. But this shows you the area that they would be settling in. Now, we're going to also notice, as far as Manasseh is concerned, a portion of that tribe has already settled on what is east of the Jordan, along with Reuben and Gad. And so their allotment wasn't even in what we would consider Israel proper. They were on the eastern shores of the Jordan River. So the other half of Manasseh and all of Ephraim, the two sons of Joseph, want their allotment, and that's what's being dealt with here. Now, you'll see that there is all of the details given to us from verses 3 down through 9, but I want to look at something in verse 10 because it gets repeated. Now, look at what it says in verse 10. Now, they did not drive out the Canaanites who dwell in Gezer, but the Canaanites dwell among the Ephraimites to this day, and they have become forced laborers. Interesting. Now, let's take a look at exactly how this is written. It says, but they did not drive out the Canaanites. Important. They didn't do this, and there seems to be something that was willful in it. Now, for whatever reason, when they began to settle this land, they didn't drive out all of those inhabitants, the ones that God said, I want them out. I will drive them out, is what God said, before you, which means that if you'll follow through on what I'm asking you to do, I'll give you victory over those nations, because I don't want them being among you for the sake of corruption. I don't want them corrupting you as they are corrupt. If you have them with you, they will corrupt as well. Now, the people who were there, the Canaanites that are being mentioned here, are people who obviously had been living in the land for who knows how long, hundreds of years minimum, maybe much older than that. It doesn't tell us exactly when they got there, but post-flood, clearly. So they've been in that area for a very long time, don't intend to leave. So for whatever reason, they allow themselves to be subjugated and are allowing themselves to become enslaved or forced as far as their labor is concerned. And that seems to be the trade-off for allowing them to not only live, but live in the land. Again, this is so like the devil. Take his people who are given over to all kinds of horrible wickedness and idolatry and all of the paganism that goes along with it. They're allowed to stay in the land and dwell in the middle of the children of Israel. Now that is a recipe for disaster. Obviously, by this you realize that they didn't ask if the Lord was okay with that. They didn't seek the Lord to drive them out. If they had come and done that, God would have had them drive them out and would have given them victory so as to cleanse that corruption out from the midst of them. This is going to be a problem for generations. This will plague the children of Israel throughout the land. Wherever they were not purged, it was going to be bad enough that the tribes were going to have people that would not follow the Lord as they were supposed to, let alone the corrupting influence of the people that were already in the land as the children of Israel came into it, and they would have kept all of their things that were so wicked that it provoked God to want to judge that entire part of the world. You get the picture? Serious matter. So it says in chapter 17, so there was also a lot for the tribe of Manasseh, for he was the firstborn of Joseph, namely for Machir, the firstborn of Manasseh, the father of Gilead, because he was a man of war. Therefore, they were given Gilead and Bashan. So you can look at the details that are given in the verses that come forward all the way up through verse 10. And so it starts to put out, again, the boundaries, north, south, east, west, all that kind of stuff, and so that they weren't really overlapping one another's territory and having the dispute. Now remember, it's God who gives these by lot. That was how God said he was going to do it with Joshua. Then inquire of me, and by lot I will tell you where they are supposed to be. So these are the nations, or the tribes rather, that have come and sought this out, and now God is telling them where they can go. It tells us in verse 11, and in Issachar and Asher, Manasseh had Bet Shean in its towns, Ibleam and its towns, and the inhabitants of Dor, which is really on the coast. That's a coastal city of the Mediterranean. And so the inhabitants of Tanakh and its towns, and also Megiddo and its towns in the hilly regions. What that tells you is pretty much from the Mediterranean, kind of on the west coast north, but then it moves down south through what we would consider as the Jezreel Valley, or the Valley of Armageddon. So it goes all the way down to what we would call Bet Shean, which is very close to the Jordan River. It passes Megiddo, as you hear. The ruins of Megiddo we visit when we're in Israel. And right across that Jezreel Valley, or that portion of the Jezreel Valley, is Nazareth, where Jesus was raised. So this gives you an idea of where that is. It helps you to know that we're talking about kind of on the parallel with Galilee, and then running towards the south and towards the east. And so it's in the northern part of the country. With all that said, look at what it says in verse 12. Yet the children of Manasseh could not drive out the inhabitants of those cities, but the Canaanites were determined to dwell in the land. Here's a problem. It says that the tribe of Manasseh, when they got there, were incapable of driving them out. So here it is. The Canaanites say, we won't go. God says, I want you to drive them out, and I will deliver them into your hand. Then how is their failure? The failure would have to come because Manasseh did not trust wholly or completely in the Lord, because God already said, I will drive them out. But it also helps us to recognize that though God makes the promise, he's looking for them to walk with him by faith, that they would seek him and that they would look for him to give them victory in this area. It doesn't matter what the Canaanites want. Who cares? As far as this is concerned, God has made the promise. I will drive them out, period. But that's going to have them have to trust that God will do exactly as he said he would do. So you see where the problem begins to develop here? So, verse 13, and so it happened when the children of Israel grew strong that they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but they did not utterly drive them out. Very important that that is recorded for us here. So here's the components. God wants them out. The people of Manasseh do not drive them out because the Canaanites wanted to remain. So the trade-off, we'll let you guys remain, but you're going to have to be servants to us. Big, big mistake. As we are going to, again, see as we work our way through the Old Testament and see how this is going to happen now that they're in the land. But again, huge mistake, and it's going to be repeated over and over and over again. God said, cleanse the land, get them all out. They got most all of them out, but the ones that remain were going to continue to be a leavening agent, introducing their idolatry and their sin to the children of Israel and ultimately corrupting all of it. That's why the Bible refers to sin as being like leaven. We would call yeast or whatever you want to call it, that once you introduce it to everything else, it begins to permeate in a loaf, let's say, or in a bit of dough. Once you introduce the leavening agent, it will start to work its way throughout until it all becomes corrupted by it. Now, I love bread with yeast in it as much as the next person, so I like it nice and fluffy and puffy and all that kind of stuff. But that's the leavening agent that's in it that causes that. Well, you get the picture. Now, verse 14, so the children of Joseph spoke to Joshua, saying, why have you given us only one lot and one share to inherit, since we are a great people, inasmuch as the Lord has blessed us until now? Now remember, half of Manasseh is already settled. They've already got their allotment, and it's on the other side of the Jordan. So this is what's left of Manasseh, and it is Ephraim as well. So we want this, but what it seems as though is going to be ours isn't enough. Well, interesting how Joshua handles this. So Joshua answered them and said, well, if you're such a great people, then go up to the forest country and clear a place for yourselves there in the land of the Perizzites and the giants, since the mountains of Ephraim are too confined for you. Okay, you don't like what you got? There's right there next to where you're already settled is the land where the giants are. And since you guys are so great in number, go take it. Well, this is kind of him pushing back. Oh, you're that great in numbers? Well, fine, there's an adjacent place. Just go take it. But this goes again to the same situation. If Manasseh and Ephraim really genuinely understood what God has called them to do, they would have basically said, yeah, it's not big enough, but that land over there where the giants are and all that stuff, that would be adequate. So they would be at that point coming before Joshua and saying, we need to go and take that land. God's given it to us. Let's seek him out and have him deliver that into our hands. Instead, they find themselves in fear, but at the same time, they're saying, we don't have enough room. Well, look at what verse 16 says. But the children of Joseph said, the mountain country is not enough for us, and all the Canaanites who dwell in the land of the valley have chariots of iron, both those who are of Bet Shean and its towns, and those who are in the valley of Jezreel. The valley of Armageddon is what's being disputed here. Interesting how that just works out, huh? Well, Joseph spoke to the house of Joseph, to Ephraim and to Manasseh, saying, you are a great people, and you have great power, so you shall not only have one lot, but the mountain country shall be yours. All throughout, although it is wooded, you will cut it down to the farthest extent, it shall be yours, and you will drive out the Canaanites, though they have iron chariots, and they are strong. So his point is, you're coming and asking me for something, saying you don't have enough room. I've given you this room. Means that God's okay with it. So go take it. And their objection is, but it's too much. The people that are there, they have iron chariots. We don't have that kind of thing. We don't have the military might. And Joshua said, you got enough people, go and take it, because really, again, implied in this, God's already given it to you. Go take it and seek him out that he would give it into your hands. Go take it. Cut down the trees. Sure, it's got lots of wooded areas. Just take down the wooded areas. But there's plenty of room there for you. Now, the scene shifts to Shiloh, and they're going to change where they are going to be encamped, and really more importantly, where is going to be the central place of worship. And it's going to last for quite some time. And it's in Shiloh. Again, you can look up maps for this and find where Shiloh is, but it's kind of still in the same general area. It's going to be to the west of the River Jordan. It's going to be to the north of Jerusalem, in that whole area, what is now part of what is known as the West Bank. North of Israel, or north of Jerusalem, rather, going to be south of the Sea of Galilee and west of the Sea of Galilee. That's kind of your general area as you look at a map of Israel. So, chapter 18, now, the whole congregation of the children of Israel, they assembled together at Shiloh, and they set up the tabernacle of meeting there, and the land was subdued before them. So it's more of a permanent place. Gilgal was a place where they would begin the whole process, but now they're trying to put in place a more normal, a more acceptable place of their corporate worship. It would be kind of, for lack of a better description, kind of the capital for some time. In verse 2, it says, Now there remained among the children of Israel 7 tribes which had not yet received their inheritance. Now, when you just read that, knowing how God has done all of this already, that would just seem like, okay, God hasn't gotten around to giving them their inheritance. Like everybody was just sitting around waiting for God to say, go here and go there, and all the rest of it. What it implies from this, knowing that the other tribes had already received theirs, and the way that Joshua answers them, there has to be this cooperation. God knows who he wants to give the land to. He's already decided all of this, but he's waiting for them to get to the place of saying, we're ready to go and occupy the land. Lord, where would you have us to go? They have not gotten to that place, and Joshua calls them on it. So Joshua said to the children of Israel, How long will you neglect to go and to possess the land which the Lord God of your fathers has given you? What are you doing sitting around here? How long are you going to sit around and not go and take hold of what God has already given to you? Well, it says this. So pick out from among you three men from each tribe. So of the 7 remaining, grab 3 guys from each tribe, and I'm going to send you out to survey the land. So I will send them, they will rise up, and they will go throughout the land, survey it according to their inheritance, and then they will come back to me. And they shall divide it into 7 parts. Judah shall remain in their territory in the south, the house of Joseph shall remain in their territory to the north, and then you therefore will survey the land of the 7 parts. Bring the survey here to me, that I may cast lots for you here before the Lord. So it is a different thing that's happening here entirely, in that they have become, unwilling or seemingly indecisive about going into the land. Other ones have been somewhat settled, and though God is having them actively go out and seek all of these areas, some have done similar things in these other areas. We know that Caleb knew where he wanted to go. We heard a little bit about Ephraim and Manasseh. We want to go here. We also want to go over there, but there are giants. So there seems to be this cooperation, I guess you could say, where God wants them to go, knows where he wants them to go, but wants them to walk with him and trust him by faith. These are the groups that are not doing so, and so he's going to have to deal with them in a different way. Go and take a look at the whole thing, but ultimately still, God by lot will tell them their boundaries. So it says, so you divide it into 7 parts, Judah will remain. You will therefore survey the land in 7 parts. Verse 6, bring it back here to me. Verse 7 says, But the Levites have no part among you, for the priesthood of the Lord is their inheritance. And Gad, Reuben, and half of Manasseh have received their inheritance beyond the Jordan on the east, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave to them. So this is, how do you get from the tribes down to the remaining 7? Well, we already know that 2.5 of them have already settled and then you have Judah already mentioned here, and so you start to whittle down by number. You get down to the 7 that are there. As far as Levi is concerned, there is no consideration from them. They're not being given an allotment of land. We are going to notice in a couple of chapters that they're going to get cities that are specified for them. Now, verse 8. So the men arose to go away, and Joshua charged them and went to survey the land, saying, Go and walk throughout the land, survey it, come back to me, that I may cast lots for you before the Lord here in Shiloh. So the men, they went, they passed throughout the land, and wrote the survey in a book in 7 parts by cities, and they came to Joshua in the camp at Shiloh, and Joshua cast lots for them in Shiloh before the Lord, and there Joshua divided the land to the children of Israel according to their divisions. So there would no longer be the excuse, well, God hasn't given us our inheritance. God had to kind of push them into doing what they should have been doing all along. Now they have their allotments. Now it's time to start doing it. Now, what we're going to find from verse 11 for the next really couple of chapters is where they settled. And starting at 11, we have, here's where Benjamin was. And so it gives you, I'll just read verse 11. Now, the lot of the tribe of the children of Benjamin came up according to their families, and the territory of their lot came out between the children of Judah and the children of Joseph. Then that would mean the southernmost would be Ephraim. So when you look on a map, Benjamin's a tiny little portion that is just above where Judah would be, and this is all around the area of Jerusalem. That's what's really being spoken of here, but it's below, it is south of where Ephraim would have settled. So it tells us really all the way from verses 12 to 20 is the bordering of what it would be. And at verse 21, the cities of the children of Benjamin according to their families were. And you'll notice a couple of recognizable places. Bethel is mentioned there in verse 21. Jericho is mentioned. So this is how you're able to kind of understand Gibeon and Mizpah. This is how it's helpful that you're able to see the area where they would have ultimately been. Notice that you see in verse 18 or 28 rather, it says Jebus, which is also Jerusalem. And then so it says the cities and the villages and all that. When you look at the allotment of the land, Benjamin's pretty small compared to most all of them, but boy, oh boy, does he have, or does that tribe ever have some very, very important places. So when you think Bethel, think also all of the areas that are to the east of Jerusalem. So of course all the way down to Jericho, but you have Bethany, and you have the places that Jesus would have gone back and forth in that final week of his life as he was coming into Jerusalem, but he was going back out to Bethany, and Bethel is right there in that same area. So a very, very important part. We see at verse 1 of chapter 19, the second lot came to Simeon, and Simeon's information is given to you in verses 1 to 9. By the time you get to verse 10, the third lot came then to Zebulun. And again, when you look at a map, you start to see, when you look at these names, if you're looking at a good detailed map, you're going to notice some of the common names of places, especially when it comes to the cities. So again, to get stuck in the minutia of that is difficult because some of these are absolutely unknown to us. But what we have here, let's remember, people might want to ask the question, well, why bother going through all the detail? The recording of this is not for the church in the 21st century to know all of those little minute details. This is a history of the children of Israel recorded for the children of Israel at that time, and they were really careful about genealogies and something as important as God divvying up the land. They want to be careful with that because they've already been told, don't move the markers. If God's the one who has given the land, make sure that your borders are accurate and don't try to take from somebody else something that isn't theirs to begin with. God's given it to them, but he's the ultimate owner of it. So the children of Israel have to be careful with this. God's given it to them as an inheritance. The more detailed the information, the better it is to make sure that it stays in its rightful owner's hands, and there wouldn't be an excuse about, well, we didn't write that down. They were careful about their records, their genealogies, their place names, and here in this case, the allotment of the land. That's why it is so detailed. For us to know this as much as we can, the big picture is we could say, God gave this to the children of Israel. What we would know as the Jewish people of today have their ancestry going back thousands of years, and this is the land that God had given to them. Case closed. There's nothing more for us to discuss here. Are they supposed to be back in the land? Absolutely. Why? Because God promised it to them. Yeah, but they're not perfect. Well, nobody is. They're still, nonetheless, the children of the promise, and there's no getting around that. So, nor should we try. So we get to verse 17. Now the fourth lot came to Issachar. Verse 24, you'll get that the fifth lot came to the tribe of Asher. And then at verse 32, the sixth lot came to the children of Naphtali. And then in verse 40, the seventh lot came to the tribe of Dan. Most of this is just kind of up in the north, from varying degrees, away from Manasseh. All this stuff kind of starts to get settled north and west of Manasseh. By this time, you're starting to get up into Galilee. Dan is in the farthest of the north. So again, taking a look at a map, you get a chance to see where they all would have settled. So as you read this on your own, have a map there next to you, and you'll be able to see where they are. And again, you'll notice a commonality in some of the names of the cities, which is what helps to establish the bordering. Even in our day, we can kind of put together what those boundaries would be based upon the cities that we still know because they've actually been able to find them and excavate them. So, with all of that said, notice what we have at verse 49. And when they had made an end of dividing the land as an inheritance according to the borders, the children of Israel gave an inheritance among them to Joshua, the son of Nun. So Joshua would have a separate place for him set aside, according to the word, verse 50, of the Lord, to give him a city that he had asked for, Timnah Serah, in the mountains of Ephraim. So that helps us to know where this would be. The mountains of Ephraim would have been the higher points in what would be the territory of Ephraim, which would be to the north of Jerusalem, but not that much further. Remember, it went where Judah would be, Benjamin, theirs overlapped right at Jerusalem. So above them would be Ephraim before getting to Manasseh, and then the other ones that are higher up, Issachar, Dan, Zebulun, all of that. So you'll see, again, by looking at a map, if you're not really all that familiar with it, it doesn't take a whole lot of time reading through this without, in all the little minutia, you can start to see where they would have all settled. And here is where Joshua wanted to be. These were the inheritance which Eleazar the priest, Joshua the son of Nun, and the heads of the fathers of the tribes of the children of Israel divided as an inheritance by lot in Shiloh before the Lord. All of that's very, very important. The places that God had designed were divvied up where God had directed them to by the people that God had raised up, and he was the one who was setting the boundaries and putting the things in place. All of it was done according to the will of God, and yet, even in all of that, because they would not drive out the Canaanites in their entirety, and some were left to remain, the justification was, well, it's still our land, we'll just make them our servants. That corrupting influence was going to plague them going forward. So, it says, they did all of this in Shiloh, verse 51, at the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and so they made an end of the dividing of the country. That closes this particular chapter of, well, the chapter, yes, but also this section of Joshua of who went where within the borders of Israel and outside of the borders of Israel. When you think about the Jordan and the 2.5 tribes, again, Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh stayed on this side of the Jordan. But now it's all settled. It's done. Now there are a few other things that are still necessary to be done. Chapter 20 says, now the Lord spoke to Joshua and he said this, now speak to the children of Israel, saying, appoint for yourselves cities of refuge, of which I spoke to you through Moses. So basically Numbers 35. And Numbers 35 is dealing with, well, if a person kills someone else, then their life is going to be required of them. And he gives them this really peculiar process of what happens if somebody puts someone else to death, but it was just incidental. It wasn't deliberate. It was something like as simple as an axe, at the head of an axe flying off the axe as he's working with it, and it kills the person as it comes off. It's not just, well, I didn't mean to do it. It's no big deal. There would be someone within that person, the person who's been killed, within his family, who could say, on behalf of the family, I am going to have vengeance and kill the person who killed our family member, and would pursue and kill him. Now, God puts in place a way where there could be a response by the person who, even though it wasn't intentional, would have a way to escape that judgment at the hands of the other family. Now, why God didn't just say straight up, you cannot kill a person in a case like that, what he does is he puts in place a system where you would have recourse for the person that didn't do so deliberately. There would be, if they followed the way of doing what was prescribed, Numbers 35, the person would be able to live their life and not have the fear of being put to death for something that they didn't do deliberately. Now, again, when you read through what the cities of refuge are, they look very odd, and you just go, why would they go through all of that? Why would God have them go through all of that stuff? But it really is very much a foreshadowing that a person, though they may be guilty of something that is worthy of death at the hands of someone else, there's a place where they could go to for refuge. They would do that. The death of the high priest would be the thing that would help them to be released from their fear of being killed. And so you see the symbolism of Jesus and the high priest, and at his death it releases the person from their penalty of death. You get the picture? Lots of very interesting imagery that goes on here. They had no clue that this would be in ways symbolic, and it would be a picture that they would be able to look back on. We are able to look back on and say, yeah, I understand why God would put that in place, but why he did it the way he did it and the symbols that are used in this, it all makes sense to us looking at it in hindsight. So with that being said, he says, appoint yourselves these cities of refuge throughout, just as I had told Moses, or spoke to Moses. And again, that goes back to chapter 35 of Numbers. Verse 3, that the manslayer who kills accidentally, kills a person accidentally or unintentionally, that they could flee to that place, and that they shall be your refuge from the avenger of blood. What they were doing was all throughout the territories from north to south and even over into the east where the 2.5 tribes were, there were supposed to be spaced out places where if a person had unintentionally killed someone else, they would have to make a beeline for that city and get there and have it understood by the elders of the city what had taken place. Whether the avenger of blood of the family of the person who had died was there yet or not, the person would plead their case. They'd be able to say, somebody's going to come looking for me, here's what's taken place. They would determine, and God would give them that reasoning and that understanding that this person, though by their actions that other person died, yet it wasn't a deliberate thing, those people in those cities were to let them in. And they could be a part of it. They couldn't leave the protection of that city. And it was going to have to wait until the next high priest had to be picked after the death of the predecessor. So it could potentially be a lifelong thing. So anyway, here's where they're supposed to do it. Verse 4. When he flees to one of those cities and he stands at the entrance of the gate of the city, this is where they would adjudicate this. And the elders of that city, they will take him into the city as one of them. They will give him a place that he may dwell among them. Then if the avenger of blood pursues him, they shall not deliver the slayer into his hand, because he struck his neighbor unintentionally and did not hate him beforehand. There was no forethought. There was no deliberation in the killing of that person. And he will dwell in that city until he stands before the congregation for judgment, and until the death of the one who is the high priest in those days. Then the slayer may return and come to his own city and his own house and the city from to which he fled. So everything would revert back to the way it was before the person was put to death, but these things would need to take place. It would have to be determined he didn't kill the person intentionally. He would dwell in one of these cities of refuge until a number of things had happened. Most importantly, the high priest would have had to have died, and that means his term as the high priest had been terminated at that point by death, and a new high priest would come in, and that would be like the reset button. The people would of the city would release them back. You can go back to where you came from. Even the family of the person who had died by their hand, though unintentionally, they had no right to claim a vengeance. And this was the way that God was going to settle it. So, at verse 7, so he appointed Kadesh in Galilee. And these are the different cities that were mentioned on the other side of the Jordan. Verse 8, by Jericho. It starts to give these cities mention. These were the cities that were appointed, verse 9, to the children of Israel for the strangers who dwell. So this begins to put them out. And you can find a list again of the ones that we know for sure. The cities of refuge, there are maps that you can go if you want to find out where they were put throughout the towns and throughout the territories. Chapter 21 is where we'll conclude today, because chapter 22, really, we're getting towards the end of the book, and we've been able to make pretty quick work through these middle parts because it's the allotment of the land. By the time that we get to chapter 22, we want to take a little bit more time with this because it is the culmination of the book. Remember, Joshua is quite old by this time. He's going to his final inheritance, and he's going to have a challenge as he ends. He's going to challenge the children of Israel in the land. I think he already sees on the horizon the problem. So many of the Canaanites are still able to dwell among them. The corrupting is already underway, as we're going to see. By the time that Joshua dies, it becomes a real turmoil. And remember, he's just one generation separated from Moses. That shows you how quickly this can happen. From Exodus to Moses to Joshua, and once Joshua's gone, everybody's looking at each other, what do we do next? They hadn't made preparations, and they were dependent upon somebody else when they should have been seeking the Lord and continuing on where they had started. But we'll get to that when we get to those chapters. Now, in verse 21, it says, then the heads of the fathers of the houses of the Levites came near to Eleazar the priest, to Joshua the son of Nun, and to the heads of the fathers' houses of the tribes of the children of Israel. This is really the last of the things. All of the allotment to the tribes are there. So now the Levites are saying, but we need to, in order to do what we're doing, we really need to be able to minister to the children of Israel wherever they are. But in order to do that, the Levites had families, they had to have households, and they had to find a way when they weren't serving in the places of worship, where were they going to have their day-to-day lives? So they wouldn't be given a section of land, but they could be given cities and dwellings. That's what's being dealt with here. They spoke to them at Shiloh in the land of Canaan, saying, the Lord commanded through Moses to give us cities to dwell in with their common lands for our livestock. And so the children of Israel gave to the Levites from their inheritance at the command of the Lord these cities and their common lands. Now, this kind of helps us to understand. Once again, you can get maps on this if it's something that you're so inclined to do. And it's going to show you where these cities are, but it really kind of does it this way. It kind of puts them throughout the land as you see this, and it really goes by the prominent tribes within the Levites. And so here's where they went to settle, but it gave them the ability to get to the corporate place of worship at Shiloh, ultimately then to Jerusalem, but it also allowed them to do priestly work in their area. Okay, so we know that still all the things of the law needed to be taking place. If leprosy came out, or if there was interpreting of the law that needed to be done, they needed to be where the people were in order to fulfill those parts of their priestly duty as well. So that all was going to have to take place, and rather than the people have to come to them in one location, they were going to be spread out among the nation. They would need a place to live. So it says, The lot came out for the families of the Kohathites and the children of Aaron the priest, who were of the Levites. They had 13 cities by lot from the tribe of Judah and Simeon. So this is in the south. Again, you look at the allotment of the 12, or of the tribes rather, you'll see that the southernmost, Simeon's kind of right in the middle of what was given to Judah, well into the south, pretty much the main southern parts. So it says, now the rest of the children of Kohath had 10 cities by lot from the families of the tribe of Ephraim and the tribe of Dan and the tribe of Manasseh. So that's pretty much spread out all throughout. In verse 7 it says, now the children of Merari according to their families had 12 cities from the tribe of Reuben, from the tribe of Gad, and from the tribe of Zebulun. So again, when you're looking through this, go ahead and look at a tribal allotment of the land, and you'll get an idea of where these different prominent families of the tribe of Levi and the priesthood, you can see where they would have gone to. The children of Israel, verse 8, gave these cities and their common lands by lot to the Levites. The Lord had commanded, as the Lord had commanded by the hand of Moses. Now, so they gave from the tribe of the children of Judah and from the tribe of the children of Simeon these cities, which were designated by name, which were from the children of Aaron, one of the families of the Kohathites, who were the children of Levi. By lot, theirs were given first. And they gave them Kirjath Arba, and so that's basically Hebron, which is close to the Dead Sea, but to the west of it and south of Jerusalem today. There is a Hebron that you can go visit today, so it gives you an idea of where that is. So it says, verse 12, but the fields of the city and the villages they gave to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, as his possession. So Caleb was a pretty interesting character where he ended up going. It was a little bit outside of the normal tribal allotment, but this helps you to understand where they were situated, this particular group. It was close to where Caleb had gone in the area of Hebron. Now, verse 13. Thus the children of Aaron, the priest, gave Hebron with its common land, a city of refuge for the slayer, Libnah, with its common land, and then it starts to give you the different names of the cities. Again, helping them at the time to recognize where those places would be by name. Some of them are known to us today, other ones are not. Verse 20, so to the families of the children of Kohath, the Levites and the rest of the children of Kohath, even they had the cities of their lot in the tribe of Ephraim, and from them they were given Shechem with its common land, and then it gives you a bunch more of the information by city. By the time you get to verse 27, the children of Gershon, of the families of the Levites, and the other half tribe, they gave to the other half tribe of Manasseh, Golan in Bashan, and its common land. There was a city of refuge for the slayer there. And so it gives you the names of these places. You know that there was from the tribe of Issachar, there were some that were given. The tribe of Asher in verse 30 is mentioned. And from the tribe of Naphtali in verse 32, these were the places, the cities, verse 33, where the Gershonites were given. Now, again, all of this is recorded for a very, very important part. When it came to the allotments of the land, the tribes that were going to settle geographical areas, now it was time to intersperse among those people the major families from within the Levites. And so they had them dotted throughout the land where they would have their own cities where they could raise their families, raise their livestock. Since they weren't given tribal allotment of land, they were given cities within those tribes so that they could serve the Lord and be able to take care of their needs. So, with that said, verse 34, the children of Merari, the rest of the Levites from the tribe of Zebulun, these are the cities that were given to them. Also, verse 36, there's some of it within the tribe of Reuben, so that would put them on the east side of the Jordan River. And so we get those bits of information. This is really also, as you see in verse 38, Gad was also one of the tribes where this allotment of the priesthood went. So this is taking care of those who had settled east of Jordan early on, before they ever came into the land. Remember, when Moses was still alive, they were given those lands in what is modern day Jordan. So it tells us in verse 40, so all the cities of the children of Merari, according to their families, and the rest of the families of the Levites, were by lot 12 cities. All the cities of the Levites within the possession of the children of Israel, there were 48 cities with their common land. So these would be Levite cities. So everything that was there in that city was from one of the households within those families of the Levites, and the surrounding areas was there to support them. But then they would have their work of the priesthood and going to the common places of worship, but also ministering to the needs in those areas. So it says, verse 42, every one of these cities had its common land surrounding it. Thus were all of the cities. Now, in verse 43, as we close out this part, you're going to see that after we get to this place, this will finally be when the tribes can go back to their inheritance on the east of the Jordan. So again, half of Manasseh, Gad, Reuben get to go back after all of this conquest. It's finally done. Now they can go back. Probably, depending on who you ask, anywhere from 5 to 7 years is what this took from when they first crossed over. Now they're able to go back to their allotment. Verse 43. So the Lord gave to Israel all the land of which he had sworn to give to their fathers, and they took possession of it, and they dwelt in it. The Lord gave them rest all around, according to that what he had sworn to their fathers. And not a man of all of their enemies stood against them. The Lord delivered all their enemies into their hand. Interesting. Because didn't we already read that the Canaanites didn't want to go and they didn't drive them out? Yeah, absolutely. As I had mentioned earlier, God said, drive them out. If you're willing to do that, I will deliver them into your hands. Yeah, but the Canaanites don't want to go. Something was going to give. God wanted them out. They didn't want to go. The children of Israel, and the tribes in particular, were the ones that determined whether or not God was going to do what he wanted to do, but he wasn't going to overrule them. So once again, this matter of free will that we always hear talked about in the New Testament is dealt with exclusively, or extensively rather, in the Old Testament. Because again, seriously, if God says, this is what I want, and he makes everything happen according to what he wants, then you've got to explain to me why there were still Canaanites in the land. It had to do with people not walking by faith and absolutely laying hold to the entirety of the promise. Therefore, God was only going to do what they were willing to have done in their name and for them and by them. There were those who had limited this, and it was going to have such horrible consequence going forward, as we're going to read and learn going forward as we study. Now, verse 45, not a word failed of any good thing which the Lord had spoken to the house of Israel. All of it came to pass. So, how do we reconcile that statement there with what we've already read? I think we just kind of covered it in the last couple of minutes. Everything that God said he would do, he did. The only things that were left undone is where they were not obedient to the letter of everything that he had said. God never told them, go and live among them and let them live among you, and if they are willing to stay, make them indentured servants. That's not what God said. Drive them out entirely. I will give them into your hands. That means that they have to believe that God would make good on that promise. Some of them, for whatever reason, we saw a little bit of this with Ephraim and Manasseh. Hey, they've got iron chariots. We can't do that. Okay, you couldn't on your own, though you're great in number according to your own assessment, Joshua said. But again, you're great in number and God has promised. So their chariots mean nothing as far as God is concerned. You're the ones that are reading too much into this, Ephraim, Manasseh. You're the ones who are afraid. You should be more like Caleb. Remember, Caleb said, I want that land where the giants are. So can I have that? And so, of course, he goes and he subdues it. And he says, maybe the Lord will be with me. That's a way of him saying, I can go there and take that because God will go before me. He's promised it. Caleb was a guy, even in his old age, though he goes, look, I'm 85 years old, but I haven't lost any of my strength since the beginning of all of this. Notice the difference between just one man, Caleb, and those who would be with him, and the entire tribe of Ephraim and half of Manasseh. They've got iron chariots. Well, grow up. God's willing to do what he wants to do, and all he's looking for you is to trust him. Be like Caleb. Yeah, there's giants there. I'm sure they had their chariots and all the rest of it, but Caleb's like, God's never failed us so far, and he told us to go do it. I want where the giants are. Just cool stuff. Walking with God by faith because he's able to make good on his promises. It's such an important thing for us to remember. So with that being said, we'll pick up at chapter 22 next time, and it really begins to wrap up. We've probably got another week or two, probably 2 weeks, because of the importance, especially of chapter 24. To finish out the book of Joshua. They're back in the land, and now Joshua's come to the end of his life. And what he has to say before he does is so very, very important, and really something that the church even now should remember as a pattern of what a person who has walked with God by faith his whole life, even on his way out the door, wants to leave as a legacy, something that people can hold on to. Whether they will or not, obviously we know the history of it. We know that they really failed in much of it, but it wasn't Joshua's failure. It would be the successive generations. So we'll pick that up next week when we get together, starting at chapter 22. And again, find yourself some maps. Go through and read these chapters again. Find the allotments of the areas. Find the cities of refuge. Find the cities where the Levites went. And you'll see that God wanted to make sure that the spiritual reverence and the need of the people for spiritual direction was very, very important. So God saw to it that the Levites would have that as well. Man would be left with no excuse. If only God had done this, we would have done that. God put everything in place for them to be able to walk with him rightly and honorably, and then it was left up to them. Would they do it? Would they not? History will tell, and we know that history. So, very important for us to remember too, because it tells us a bit of theology. How does God do what he does? What does he expect of us? What happens when we're obedient versus disobedient? It's there in vivid color history. So until next week, I pray that God blesses your pursuit.